She had $8 in her pocket and 3 rejection letters in her hand. They told her a single woman had no business teaching on the frontier. They said she was too refined, too educated, too alone to survive out here. But what those men in Bismarck didn't know was that Clara Winslow wasn't looking for their approval. She was looking for her destiny. And she found it in the last place she ever expected, on a cattle ranch, surrounded by 40 rough cowboys who couldn't read their own names, and one quiet rancher with gray eyes who believed that literacy was freedom. What happens next will make you cry, cheer, and believe in second chances all over again. But here's the twist. The moment that changes everything, it involves a bullet, a needle, and the most terrifying 2 hours of Clara's life. Stay with me until the end. Trust me. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. The lesson. Sometimes the doors that slam in your face are actually pushing you toward the life you were always meant to live. Rejection isn't the end. It's a redirection. The meaning. This story reminds us that our worth is never determined by who says yes to us, but by what we build with the chances we create for ourselves. If this story touches your heart, leave a comment telling me about a time rejection led you somewhere better. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss another story that matters. The sun in that territory had no mercy. It beat down on Clara Winslow's shoulders, making her proper gray dress feel like a wool blanket in July. The third man to turn her away, a Mr. Pritchard from the land office, stepped out onto the boardwalk behind her. He cleared his throat with a sound full of phony pity. "Miss Winslow, about that county school position. I have had to reconsider." Clara stood up straight, though she felt like folding. He went on, saying the school board figured a refined lady like her couldn't handle the rough farm children. She cut him off, her voice quiet but sharp as a needle. "So, my years of experience in a classroom of 40 children in Philadelphia mean nothing?" Pritchard got fidgety. He insisted it was not about her skill, but about what was proper. A single woman living all alone out on the prairie. It would cause talk. That was the real truth of it, wrapped up in fake concern. She had expected the frontier to be hard, but she never imagined the deepest cut would come from pure foolishness. "I understand," she said, her voice like ice. "Thank you for your time." Before he could offer her some other sorry job, she turned and walked away. Every step on that wooden sidewalk was a tiny victory against their small minds. The whole town of Bismarck seemed to mock her, a saloon, a land office, and a general store. Everything a place needed to grow, except it seemed a good teacher who happened to be a woman. Clara found a sliver of shade and pulled out a small notebook. Inside were 3 pages of leads she had gathered from newspapers and letters. Now all 3 had a firm line drawn through them. $8. That was all she had left. Maybe enough for a week if she ate light. After that, she had no idea. Just then a voice cut through her thoughts. "Ma'am, you look like you could use a drink of water." A young boy, no older than 14, stood before her holding out a simple tin cup. He was dusty from head to toe with kind eyes that looked like they had seen their share of hardship. Clara started to refuse, but the boy insisted. He told her she had the same tight-lipped look his sister got right before she fainted from wearing her corset too tight. Clara could not help but smile a little at that. The boy's story was so earnest, and his offer was so simple. She finally took the cup. The water was warm and tasted a bit like metal, but it was the kindest thing that had happened to her all day. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. The boy told her his boss, a Mr. Bennett, always said that kindness was an investment that paid well. He asked if she was looking for work. The question made her chest ache, but she admitted she was a teacher, or at least she used to be. The boy, whose name was Thomas, let out a low whistle when he heard she was from New York. He pointed across the street to a tall, quiet man loading a wagon. "That is Mr. Bennett," he said. "He owns the Red Willow Ranch. He is the best man you could ever work for." Clara watched the rancher move. He lifted a heavy sack of flour with a steady strength, wasting no motion. There was a solidness about him. Thomas explained that Mr. Bennett was a fair boss who had even bought a whole crate of books for his ranch hands, saying a man's mind deserved to be improved. He is from Texas, Thomas said. Started with nothing and built the biggest ranch around here, but he has a problem a teacher could solve. Thomas lowered his voice. You see, most of the ranch hands cannot read or write. Mr. Bennett tries to teach them, but he is too busy running the place. The books just sit there, and the ranch records are a complete mess. He needs someone with an education to help out. But, Clara finished for him, educated folks do not usually look for work on a ranch, and the ones who do are men. Thomas nodded, kicking at the dirt. Mr. Bennett is cautious. He says you have to prove your worth on the Red Willow. Clara looked over at the quiet rancher again. An idea, bold and unexpected, started to form in her mind. Well, Thomas Reeves, she said, her shoulders straightening, it sounds like Mr. Bennett is about to meet a very determined, educated woman. Her heart. Where exactly is this Red Willow Ranch? A grin spread across Thomas's face. About 8 miles northwest. But Mr. Bennett, he is right here in town, ma'am. We are finishing a supply run. He nodded toward the wagon. I can introduce you. Clara clutched her satchel. Down to her last $8 after 3 rejections, she came to Dakota to make a difference, not to be a burden. This boy was the first person to look at her like she was a solution. Yes, she said, her voice firm. Please do. Thomas nearly jumped with excitement. Mr. Bennett, sir. The tall man turned. He was maybe 35, with a face carved by the sun and sky. His sharp gray eyes sized Clara up in an instant. He moved with a quiet purpose, revealing a scar on his jaw and calloused hands. His gun belt looked like it was a part of him. Thomas! Bennett's voice was a low Texas drawl. We are almost loaded. Are you ready to head out? Yes, sir, Thomas said, gesturing eagerly to Clara. This is Miss Winslow. She's a teacher from Columbia College, and she needs a job. Thomas. The single word cut him off. Bennett's eyes stayed locked on Clara. Let the lady speak for herself. Clara looked right back at him. This felt like a negotiation, and she would not show weakness. Miss Clara Winslow, she said, offering her hand like a businessman. I am a certified teacher looking for work. He took her hand briefly. His grip was strong. Cole Bennett, Red Willow Ranch. Columbia is a fine school. What brings you out to Dakota? The question was straight, and she gave him a straight answer. I came here to make a difference. I believe this land needed education just as much as it needed railroads. But I have learned the frontier does not always see it that way. She kept her voice steady. I was turned down for 3 teaching jobs today. They turned me down because I do not have a husband. A hint of respect showed in Bennett's eyes. That is how it is out here sometimes. Old ideas die hard. He paused. What kind of work are you after? Anything that uses my skills and pays a fair wage, Clara replied. I can teach all subjects, manage accounts, handle correspondence, and organize records. Bennett listened, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, choosing his words with care. Red Willow has 40 men. Most of them cannot read or write their own name. I've tried to teach them, but I do not have the skill for it. The ranch ledgers are a mess, and I am the only one who can write a clear letter. He looked from Thomas back to her. I need someone to teach my men, someone to manage the books and correspondence, someone who knows these men work hard and deserve a chance to better themselves. Clara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice calm. What does a position like that pay? $40 a month, with your own private cabin and meals, he said. Sundays are yours, and there is one rule on my ranch. You treat people with respect, or you're gone. That applies to how they treat you, too. The pay was more than generous. Why so much? Clara had to ask. Because reading is not a luxury, Miss Winslow. It is freedom, Bennett said, his voice low and sure. A man who can read can understand his own contracts. A man who can write can tell his own story. That is something worth paying for. Here, finally, was a man who understood that education was a tool, not a decoration. "I would need to see the ranch first," she said. Bennett nodded. "That is fair. We are leaving now. You can ride with us. If the place suits you, we will make a deal. If not, Thomas will bring you back tomorrow." He looked at her seriously. "I will give you fair warning. It is hard country, and the men are rough. But I run an honest operation." Clara considered her last $8 and the closed doors she had faced all day. Her teaching certificate suddenly felt like a key instead of a burden. "I will come see the ranch," she declared. A hint of warmth entered Bennett's eyes. "Good. Thomas, help Miss Winslow into the wagon. We are wasting daylight." The boy, buzzing with excitement, grabbed her bag. "You will love it, Miss Winslow." "Thomas," Bennett said dryly, "let the woman breathe." Clara settled into the wagon, the smell of flour and leather filling the air. It smelled like a new beginning. A fellow with a salt and pepper beard gave her a respectful nod. "Ma'am, sir," Clara said right back. She saw the surprise on his face, like he wasn't used to a well-spoken woman calling him sir. Bennett hopped onto the wagon seat and grabbed the reins with an easy confidence. "Everyone on board? Good. Let's get a move on." The wagon groaned and started rolling down the main street of Bismarck. Clara watched the town shrink behind them. There was the land office where Mr. Pritchard had politely turned her down. There was the hotel where she was about to spend her very last dollars. Just 3 hours ago, she'd stood on that dusty street, thinking this whole trip west was the worst decision she'd ever made. Now she was heading into the open prairie with a man she'd just met, toward a ranch she'd never seen, to do a job she could hardly imagine. And Clara Winslow, a certified teacher from Columbia, couldn't help but smile. The Dakota prairies spread out before them like an untold story. The grass was a sea of gold and green under the late sun. Far off, you could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing. The sky was just enormous, bigger than any sky ought to be. "First time out on the prairie?" Bennett asked without turning his head. "Yes, sir. It's a far cry from back east." "Well, everything's a far cry from back east." Clara watched a hawk circling high above them. "That's why I came." Bennett made a sound that might have been a chuckle. "You'll do just fine, Miss Winslow. Folks who run toward different things instead of away from them usually do." They rode in a comfortable quiet after that. Clara figured out quick that Bennett wasn't one for idle chatter, and she was grateful for it. Young Thomas, however, decided he was her personal tour guide. "That there is Bennett Creek," he said, pointing to a line of trees cutting across the plain. "Water's good and clean all year round. Mr. Bennett worked out a deal with the Lakota about fishing. They get the upper part of the creek, we get the lower. Works out for everybody." "The Lakota are close by?" Clara asked. "Reservation is about 20 miles north, but their hunting parties come through pretty regular. Mr. Bennett has a trade deal with them, too. We give 'em beef, they give us hides and berries. Hasn't been any trouble yet." "Yet," an older ranch hand grumbled from the back. "That can change in a heartbeat, boy. Don't you be filling the lady's head with fairy tales." Thomas's face turned red. "I'm not. Mr. Bennett, tell him." "Peace, you two," Bennett said, his voice calm. "Miss Winslow is smart enough to know the frontier has its risks. She doesn't need us bickering about it." The old hand quieted down, but Clara saw him watching her with a look of concern. She held his gaze until he was the one who looked away. The sun was getting low when they came over a small hill, and she saw the Red Willow Ranch laid out below. It was bigger than she'd imagined. A solid, well-built main house faced the creek Thomas had pointed out. Behind it was a long bunkhouse, a big barn, and a cookhouse with smoke curling from its chimney. Corrals full of healthy-looking cattle spread out behind the barn. It all looked solid, like someone had put down roots and intended to stay. "That's home," Bennett said. "I suppose it's not much compared to those fancy schools back east." "It's beautiful," Clara said, and she truly meant it. Bennett turned then and gave her a good long look. It wasn't romantic, but it was something like recognition. It was like two people realizing they spoke the same language, even if they'd learned it in different places. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you settled in. If you're going to teach these fellas, you might as well meet them." The wagon rolled down toward the buildings. Men started coming out of the bunkhouse in the barn, curious about their arrival. Clara counted about 15 of them, all with the same look of cautious curiosity. A woman teaching grown men how to read? She might as well have been a calf with 2 heads. Bennett stopped the wagon near the house and set the brake. Before she could try to climb down, he was right there, offering a hand. "Watch your step," he said. "It's a bit of a drop." She took his hand, feeling all those eyes on her. Her dress was covered in dust, and her hair was coming loose. She knew she looked like what she was, a city woman who was way out of her element. But she had learned a long time ago that you can look unsure without being unsure. So she stood up straight, brushed the dust from her skirt, and faced the men with her head held high. Bennett stood beside her, not touching, but close enough to feel like a pillar of support. "Listen up, boys," he called out, and the mumbling stopped. "This here is Miss Clara Winslow. She's a certified teacher from Columbia College, and she's thinking about taking a position here at Red Willow." "Teaching what?" one of the younger men shouted. "We ain't a bunch of schoolboys." "She'll be teaching reading, writing, and basic arithmetic to any man who wants to learn," Bennett answered smoothly. "She'll also be organizing the ranch's books and handling the mail. Any other questions?" The men shuffled their feet and whispered to each other. You could see the doubt all over their faces. This just wasn't a woman's job, especially not on a cattle ranch surrounded by men who smelled of sweat and livestock. "I've got a question." It was the grizzled man from the wagon. "No offense, ma'am, but what do you know about ranch life? This ain't some quiet schoolroom. It's hard work, long days, and rough company." Clara looked him right in the eye. "You are right, sir. I don't know much about ranching. But I know all about hard work. I paid my way through college by teaching night classes to factory workers. I know about long hours. I handled 40 students in a one-room schoolhouse. And I know about rough company. I grew up with 3 brothers who taught me that real respect comes from character, not from fancy manners." The man's eyebrows shot up. "Factory workers in Philadelphia," she continued, feeling a familiar fire in her belly. Men and women who worked 12-hour shifts and still came to learn. They were tired, and they were skeptical, but they learned. And when they did, it changed their lives completely. A silence fell over the men. They were looking at her differently now. The doubt was still there, but it was mixed with something like real consideration. "What makes you think we want to learn?" another man asked. "Some of us get along just fine without books." "There's nothing wrong with getting along," Clara said. "But I imagine you'd rather thrive. Reading means you can check your own wages, that you can read your own contracts and write letters back home. It means no one can pull a fast one on you with the fine print." One man mumbled that a foreman had done that to them once, shorting their pay for 6 long months. Clara's voice was steady. "Exactly. Education is not about being fancy. It is about having control over your own life." The men looked at each other, a change happening right before her eyes. Doubt was making way for interest. The older, weathered man finally spoke up. "Ben, you vouching for her?" Every eye in the place turned to Bennett. He stood tall in the twilight. When he spoke, his voice was filled with complete confidence. "I'll vouch for her abilities and her good character," he stated. "Miss Winslow is qualified for the job, and she is ready to treat you all like grown men, not charity cases. That is a step up from yesterday." He took a breath. "Of course it is her decision. She has not agreed to it yet." And just like that, all the attention was back on Clara. 15 pairs of eyes watched the city woman, waiting for her answer. Clara thought about the dust, the pity, and the 3 doors that had been shut in her face. She thought about her last $8. Then she looked at the men of Red Willow Ranch, and at Thomas's hopeful face. "I will do it," Clara declared. On one condition. Bennett raised an eyebrow. And what is that? That every man who wants to learn has the same chance, no matter his age or how fast he learns. Nobody gets left behind in my classroom. Deal, Bennett said without a moment's hesitation. Anything else? Yes, Clara said, looking at the men gathered around. I expect your respect, but I plan to earn it. I will work hard and be fair. In return, I expect your honest effort. A grizzled man came forward, his hand outstretched. Jack Morrison, ma'am. I'm the trail boss. I believe we have ourselves a deal. Clara shook his hand, her grip firm. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Morrison. Just Jack, ma'am. We are not much for formalities out here. One by one, the others introduced themselves. There was young Thomas, who was smiling from ear to ear, and a Mexican hand named Carlos, who spoke in careful English. A quiet fellow named Peter had old rope burns scarring his hands. By the time the last man had shaken her hand, the sun had set, and Clara's head was spinning. But beneath it all, she felt a strong sense of purpose. You can stay in the foreman's cabin, Bennett said, guiding her to a small building near the bunkhouse. Jack prefers bunking with the men. Anyway, the cabin was a simple single room with a bed, a table, and a small stove. Her bag was already sitting on the bed. A lantern cast a warm glow on the wooden walls. There's a water pump right outside, Bennett told her. Meals are served at sunup, noon, and sundown in the cookhouse. You can eat with us or take your food back here, whichever you prefer. Clara placed her hand on the table, feeling the smooth, solid wood. This was her own space, on her own terms. It is perfect, she said quietly. Bennett nodded. Good. I will let you get settled. I am in the main house if you need anything. He started to leave, but paused at the door. Miss Winslow, thank you. What you are doing for these men, it truly matters. We will see if I am any good at it first, Clara replied. You will be, Bennett said with certainty. You have already done the hardest part. What is the hard part, she asked. Showing up. He gave a slight tip of his hat. Good night, ma'am. And with that, he was gone. Clara was alone in her cabin, miles from town, surrounded by men who needed a teacher and a rancher who saw knowledge as a form of freedom. She sat on the surprisingly comfortable bed and let out a long, slow breath. Just 24 hours ago, she had faced nothing but rejection. Now, she had a good-paying job, a decent roof over her head, and a class full of students who seemed eager to learn. Clara took off her dusty boots and set them neatly under the bed. She then lit another lantern and started to unpack. She laid out her teaching books on the table, arranging them carefully. Her grammar books, her math workbook, and a few personal items like her mother's brooch and her journal. Tomorrow, the real work would start. She would have to see what supplies the ranch had, figure out who wanted lessons, and see what they already knew. But for tonight, in her little cabin that smelled of wood and lamp oil, Clara Winslow felt a glimmer of hope. It was not the desperate kind of hope she had been feeling lately. This was a solid, grounded hope, the kind you feel when you find a place where you truly belong. Outside, the prairie wind rustled through the tall grass. A man's laugh carried on the clear night air. The sky was so full of stars it looked crowded with light. Clara opened her journal to a clean page. After a moment, her pen began to move across the paper. June 15th, 1883, Red Willow Ranch, Dakota Territory. Today, I was turned down 3 times and hired once. I am not sure I can do what Cole Bennett has asked of me, but I know this much: I would rather fail at something important than succeed at being invisible. Tomorrow, I will begin. She closed her journal, put out the lamps, and slipped under the clean blankets. She fell asleep listening to the sounds of the wind and her own rising hopes. Miles away, Mr. Pritchard was likely sleeping well, sure that he had done her a great favor. But here, Clara Winslow smiled in her sleep. She dreamed of teaching men to read by the soft glow of a lantern, and of books turning into keys. She dreamed of a Texas rancher with kind gray eyes, who knew that being able to read was the same as being free. It seemed that those 3 rejections were the best thing that could have ever happened to her. But that was a story for another. She woke up knowing she had to prove that hope was a real thing, something you could build a life on. For now there was just the quiet and the stars, and the feeling she'd finally landed in a place that wanted her for who she was. Dawn on the Red Willow Ranch hit fast and bright, turning the whole prairie gold. Clara heard men talking outside her cabin and the groan of the pump handle. She got up and put on her sturdiest dress, a dark blue one that wouldn't show the dust. When she stepped out, the ranch was already humming with work. Men were feeding horses and checking on cattle, moving with a purpose she understood. The air smelled like coffee, wood smoke, and livestock, a combination that would always feel like a fresh start. "Miss Winslow," Thomas called out, his face full of excitement. "You're already up. I figured city folks slept in, not that you're... Clara couldn't help but smile. "Breathe, Thomas. I've been up for a while now." "We don't have a rooster, ma'am," he said. "That was probably just Jack snoring over in the bunkhouse." Clara let out a real laugh, one that felt easy and new. "Well, Jack is mighty punctual then. Is there any breakfast?" "Yes, ma'am. Cookie's got biscuits, gravy, and bacon waiting." "Everyone's wondering if you'll join us or take your food back to the cabin." She had already made up her mind about that. To teach these men, she had to be one of them. "I'll eat with everyone, thank you." The cookhouse was a long room with rough tables that could fit about 30 men. This morning, around 20 were there, the others already out working the range. The talking stopped the moment Clara walked in, and she could feel every eye on her. Cole Bennett sat at the head of a table with a coffee cup and a ledger book. He looked up as she entered, and his expression seemed to relax a bit. "Miss Winslow, come on in and sit. Cookie saved you some good biscuits before this bunch of wolves got to them all." A couple of the men chuckled, and the room felt a little friendlier. Clara walked to the table, her dress brushing against dusty pants and worn-out boots. A man she recognized as Jack Morrison stood up. "Here, ma'am, this is a good spot right next to the coffee pot." "Thank you, Jack," she said as she sat. A plate loaded with food appeared right away. It smelled better than anything she had eaten in a long, long time. The biscuits were still steaming, the gravy was thick with sausage, and the bacon was perfectly crisp. "Cookie doesn't do small helpings," Thomas said from across the table. "He says a working man needs fuel, just like a horse." "Cookie is a wise man," Clara said, taking a bite of a biscuit that was so good it almost made her sigh. "This is just wonderful." A large black man with graying hair came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on an apron. He had a look that said he had seen it all. "Wonderful," she says. His deep voice rumbled with amusement. "Now that's a word I don't hear much around here. It's usually just more and faster and, Cookie, why isn't there any pie?" "Because you ate the last of it last night, Cookie," a younger ranch hand shouted. "We all saw you." "That is a bold-faced lie," Cookie shot back, pointing a spoon at him. "That was research, quality control." All the men laughed, and Clara found herself smiling with them. It felt like a family. "Miss Winslow," Cookie said, walking over. "I'm Marcus Freeman, but you can just call me Cookie. I've been with this outfit for 5 years. If you need anything at all, you just let me know." Clara stood up and shook his offered hand. "Clara Winslow. And please call me Clara. That biscuit recipe of yours is worth its weight in gold." Cookie's eyes crinkled when he smiled. "A woman who knows a good biscuit is a sensible woman. You'll do just fine out here, Miss Clara. These fellas are a little rough around the edges, but they're good men." "Hey now," Jack protested. "Some of us are good men on top of the dust, too." "That jury is still out on you, Morrison," Cookie replied warmly. Clara ate her breakfast as the men talked all around her. She learned that the young man named Billy had a habit of talking his way into trouble. She learned that a quiet man with scarred hands named Peter was the best bronc rider around. And she learned Carlos sent half his pay back home to his family in Texas. She also noticed that Cole Bennett seemed to be listening to everything, even while he looked at his ledger. He was the kind of leader who knew his people instead of just bossing them around. When the meal was over, Bennett finally looked up. "Miss Winslow, when you're done, I'd like to show you the supplies we've got. We have some books, but I'm not sure what else you might need." "I'm ready now," Clara said, and she followed him outside. The supply room was built onto the main house. It was a storage space, but someone had tried to make one corner into a little office with a few chairs and 3 crates of books. Clara went straight for the books, kneeling down to look through them. There were dime novels, farming manuals, a worn-out Bible, and a set of Shakespeare that looked brand new. Then she pulled out a clean copy of Frederick Douglass's autobiography. "Where on earth did this come from?" she asked, holding it up. Bennett looked over from a stack of papers. "Cookie brought it with him. He said if we're going to teach men to read, they ought to read something that matters. Why do you ask?" Clara gently touched the cover. She thought about her own schooling, where her teachers had taught her that being able to read was the first step to being free. "Because Cookie is exactly right," she said softly. "This is the kind of book that truly matters." She kept looking. There were more practical books than storybooks, but there was also some poetry and a collection of Lincoln's speeches. She also found a well-read copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. "Somebody here is a serious reader," Clara noted. "Jack reads. Peter gives it a try. Carlos is still learning, but the man is determined," Bennett said, crouching down next to her. "They want to learn, Miss Winslow. Some of them have wanted this for years, but never got the chance. They'll work hard for you." Clara looked at him in the dusty light. She could see the fine lines around his eyes and a small scar on his jaw. His hands were calloused from work, but they were clean. "Why is this so important to you?" she asked him directly. "Most ranch owners wouldn't go to this trouble." Bennett was quiet for a second. He reached for a small leather-bound book from a shelf. The cover was worn smooth. "This belonged to my father," he said, opening it. Inside, in slow, careful handwriting, it said, "Property of Samuel Bennett." Underneath that, in different ink, were the words, "Read to me by my son Cole, 1867 to 1870. "Your father couldn't read," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "No," Cole said. "He was born enslaved in Georgia. He got his freedom after the war and worked himself to the bone in Texas. He always said, modeled how he wished he could read his own contracts and write his own letters." Bennett gently touched the writing in the book. "I was just 11 years old when I started teaching him myself, using old newspapers and any book I could get." He learned slowly, but he was determined. The day he finally read a whole newspaper article all by himself, he wept. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "When did he pass away?" "The year after he wrote this," Bennett said softly. "Pneumonia. But in those final months he could read. He could write his own name instead of just making an X. He understood what he was signing." Bennett closed the book with care. "That meant the world to him. And that is why it means the world to me that the men on this ranch get the same opportunity." In that moment, Clara finally understood. This was not about making the ranch run better or looking modern. This was deeply personal. This was about honoring a father who had longed for an education. "I will teach them well," she promised. "I know you will," Bennett replied, placing the book back on the shelf. "Now, what supplies do you need?" They spent the next hour making a list. Clara needed chalk and slates, more books for grown-up learners, and better lamps for their evening lessons. Bennett wrote it all down in his ledger. "We will head to Bismarck for supplies next week," he said. "You can come along and pick out what you need." "That would be a great help, thank you." Bennett nodded, glancing at the sun. "I am heading to the north fence line, but Jack can show you around this afternoon. After supper, we will gather anyone wanting lessons and see where we stand." A wave of nerves washed over Clara. Making a good first impression was crucial. "That sounds perfect," she managed to say. Bennett stood and offered her a hand. His grip was solid. "Clara, a word of advice. The men might test you. It is not personal. You stay fair, and they will respect you. If anyone gives you real trouble, you come straight to me. Understood?" "Understood," she said. "But I believe I can hold my own." The corner of his mouth twitched into what might have been a smile. Mouth! I expect you can, but the offer stands anyway. After he left, Clara spent the morning turning the cluttered supply room into a real classroom. Just after noon, Jack appeared in the doorway. Mr. Bennett said you might want a tour now that you have worked a miracle in this disaster of a room. It was a mess, was it not? She laughed. For the next 2 hours, Jack showed her everything. He pointed out the creek with the clearest water and the hill with the best view. They stopped at a small family cemetery where Bennett's parents were buried next to 3 ranch hands who died in a storm 5 years back. Mr. Bennett looks after his own, Jack said quietly, standing by the simple graves. You work for Red Willow, your family. That is just his way. Clara looked at the graves, at the care someone had taken to maintain them. Fresh flowers sat in jars by 2 of the markers. They were simple wildflowers. That kind of beauty took real effort. He seems like a good man, she said softly. The best I have ever worked for, Jack stated plainly, looking out at the prairie. We both came up from Texas after the war, same as Mr. Bennett, together since '68. I have watched him build this whole place from nothing but grit, and a belief that hard-working men deserve a fair shake. And now you are the trail boss, Clara noted. That is a big responsibility. It is, Jack admitted. And I still cannot read a contract or write a proper letter to my sister in Houston. There has just never been time to learn until now. Clara looked at the capable man beside her. This evening when we meet, will you come? Yes, ma'am. I reckon most of the boys will be, too. Now let me show you the horses. Ones are safe and which ones will toss you in the dirt just for fun. The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of new information about horses, cattle, and the complex life of the ranch. By the time Clara got back to her cabin, her feet ached, but her heart felt full of purpose. Tonight she would finally start the work she had traveled 1,500 miles to do. She changed into a clean, practical dress and pulled her hair back firmly. She knew from experience that adult students needed to see a teacher, not just a young woman. Dinner was a quiet affair, the men tired from their long day. But Clara caught them stealing glances her way. When it was announced that lessons would start in an hour, a tense silence fell over the room. Bennett, sitting at the head of the table, set his cup down with a deliberate calm. Bennett spoke with a steady calm. He told them, Miss Winslow is offering lessons for anyone interested. There was no pressure and no judgment if you passed, but if you joined, you had to be on time, work hard, and show respect. Any questions? Young Billy looked worried. What if we ain't any good at it? What if we're too slow to learn? Clara answered before Bennett could. Billy, nobody is too stupid to learn. Some folks just catch on quicker than others, that's all. I have taught men who had never held a pencil. They all learned, and so will you. Billy's face changed from worried to a little hopeful. Peter, who rarely said much, asked quietly, What about reading? If a man can't read a lick, where does he start? With the letters, Clara said. Just 26 little marks that make up every word we say. Once you know them, you can read anything. It is not magic, Peter. It is just spotting patterns. How do you figure? Jack asked. Well, you know which clouds mean rain, don't you? You can tell a healthy calf from a sick one with just a look. You can pick out one certain cow in a herd of 200. That is all pattern recognition. Reading is the same thing, just with letters instead of clouds or cattle. The men looked at each other as the idea began to make sense. 1 hour tonight, Bennett announced. We will see how it goes. After supper, a line of men headed for the supply room. Clara counted 17 of them, more than half the hands on the ranch. They looked nervous and hopeful all at once. Clara came in last, giving them a moment to get settled. When she entered, the room went quiet and 17 pairs of eyes watched her. She had taught her first class at 19, facing down 40 factory workers who doubted her. She learned back then that the first 5 minutes were everything. Clara walked to the front standing tall. She did not smile or make excuses. She just met their gaze one by one until the room was completely silent. Evening, gentlemen. I am Clara Winslow, and for this next hour, I am your teacher. She let that sink in. First, I need to know where each of you stands. I'm going to ask a question, and I need a straight answer. What you say in here stays in here. Agreed? A few men nodded. Clara held up a slate. When I point to you, say your name and tell me if you can write it. Yes, no, or sometimes. She began with Jack. Jack Morrison, sometimes. The letters don't always come out right. Thank you, Jack, Clara said, making a note. Peter. Peter Chen. No, he said softly but clearly. Never did learn. Next was Carlos. Carlos Mendoza. Yes, in Spanish. One by one, they answered. By the end, Clara had a clear picture of her class. 4 could read a little bit, 6 could write their own names, 7 could not read at all, but every single one of them wanted to learn. All right, Clara said, putting her slate down. Here is the plan. We are not going to have everyone learning the same thing. We will work in groups based on what you know, and you will move up when you are ready. She brought out 3 different reading books. Jack, Thomas, Billy, and Carlos, you are with me. We will work on reading whole sentences. Peter, you and the other fellas starting fresh will work with Cookie on the letters. Cookie, you're helping me teach tonight. Cookie's eyes got wide. Ma'am, I can't do that. You can read, Cookie. That means you can help someone else learn. Trust me, Clara said with a smile. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who remember what it was like not to know. Cookie stood up, a look of pride on his face. All right then, all you men who can't read yet, come sit with me. We are going to learn the alphabet. The men moved into their groups. Peter looked relieved to be with others who were just starting. Billy puffed his chest out a little, proud to be in the middle group. The rest of you, Clara told the 4 men who could already read some, I want you all to practice your writing. Copy this paragraph. She wrote on the board, a working man who can read has power. He can understand his own contracts. He can learn new skills. Reading is not a luxury. Reading is freedom. For the next hour, the room was filled with the quiet sounds of learning. Clara moved between the groups, helping her students sound out words. She praised Carlos for reading a full sentence, and gently corrected Billy when he rushed. She checked on Cookie and found him doing a fine job, using cooking examples to explain letters. See? P and I together make a new sound, just like flour and water make dough. She watched the other men, their rough hands carefully trying to form letters, and felt a deep respect for them. When the hour was up, every man had learned something. Peter knew 10 letters. Carlos had read 3 sentences. Jack had written a paragraph that you could actually read. That is time, Clara said. Good work tonight, everyone. We will meet again the day after tomorrow, same time. Try to practice for a few minutes before then. The men left slowly, some nodding at her and murmuring their thanks. Peter stopped at the door. Miss Winslow, thank you. I never thought... He trailed off. I never thought someone would teach me so patient-like without making me feel dumb. Clara felt a lump in her throat. You are not dumb, Peter. You just never had the chance to learn. That is all. He nodded and left. Clara was alone, tidying up when she heard footsteps. It was Bennett leaning against the doorframe. How did it go? He asked. Better than I hoped, she admitted. They are all eager to learn, and Cookie is a natural-born teacher. Peter has his reasons for being nervous, Bennett said quietly. A few years back, his hands got torn up bad in a rope accident. He has been shy about doing delicate work ever since. Probably figures writing is beyond him. It is not, Clara said with certainty. It will take patience, but he can do it. Bennett nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. You are good at this. Reading people, I mean, figuring out what they need. That is just part of teaching, she replied. A deliberate calm. You cannot teach folks if you do not understand them first. They stood in a comfortable quiet for a moment. I should let you get some rest, Bennett said at last. Long day tomorrow. We are moving cattle, but things should settle into a routine after that. Thank you, Clara said, for everything, for giving me this chance. My father would have liked you, Bennett replied, turning to leave. He had that same kind of stubborn hope, the kind that does not know how to quit. Back in her cabin, Clara lit her lamp and opened her journal. She did not write about lesson plans. Instead, she wrote about a quiet rancher who believed learning to read was a kind of freedom, and the surprising feeling that she had finally found where she belonged. 3 days ago, she had been turned away 3 times. Tonight, she had taught 17 men the first steps to a new life. She looked out from her little cabin into the endless prairie night. It was not empty, but full of promise. She knew tough days were coming. There would be students who fell behind and lessons that just did not work. But tonight, she had proof that a little hope and a lot of hard work could turn a closed door into a new path. Clara Winslow, the teacher nobody in Bismarck wanted, blew out her lamp. And just 8 miles away, those town jobs were still empty, waiting for someone who fit in their little box. Clara was done waiting. She was building her own school right here. The rhythm of her new life fell into place. 3 nights a week, Clara taught the men of Red Willow Ranch how to read. Peter got his letters down and started on simple words. Carlos, with his thick accent, began reading ranch mail out loud, understanding every word. Jack Morrison, the trail boss, spent 2 long hours writing his first letter to his sister in Houston, 15 careful lines that left him looking plumb tuckered out. Clara took over the ranch ledgers, too, turning Bennett's messy notes into clean, sensible columns. She found he was undercharging the railroad for his beef, missing little lines in the contract that cost him $300 every quarter. When she pointed it out, he stared at the numbers, then at her. "That's $900 we lost this year," he said softly. "All because I couldn't read the fine print." "Well, it's 900 you will not lose next year," Clara told him. "Because now you have somebody who can." She thought he would be grateful, but instead Bennett got real quiet. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "My father died in debt over papers he could not read. I swore that would not happen to me or this ranch." Clara gently touched his hand. "It will not happen again." Soon the days had their own peaceful rhythm. Clara would wake up with the ranch hands, eat with them, and spend her mornings with the account books in her little office. In the afternoons, she would plan lessons or ride out with Thomas to learn the lay of the land. The boy acted as her personal guide, showing her where the wildflowers grew and where you could see 3 territories from one hill. But one afternoon, about 6 weeks after she arrived, everything went wrong. They were riding north near the creek, Clara on a sweet mare named Daisy, and Thomas on his usual spirited horse. The August heat was a heavy blanket over the land, making the air shimmer. Storm weather, the cowboys called it, even under a perfectly clear blue sky. "You are getting better on that horse," Thomas noted. "At first you sat so stiff. Now you look like you belong up there." "Well, thank you, sir," Clara said with a smile. She had changed out here. Her hands were rough from the rains and her dresses were permanently stained with Texas dust. She was becoming someone new, and she liked it. All of a sudden, Thomas pulled up short, his eyes sharp. "Did you hear that?" At first, all Clara heard was the wind and the creek. Then she caught it, a sound that did not belong. Hoofbeats, a lot of them, coming in fast from the north. "That's the payment run," Thomas whispered, his voice shaky with fear. "Mr. Bennett and Jack went to get the railroad money this morning. They should have been back by now." The sound of the horses grew louder and a cloud of dust rose in the distance. That was way too much dust for just 7 men. It looked wild and panicked. "Something is not right," Thomas said, spinning his horse around. "Miss Winslow, you need to ride for the ranch. Push Daisy as hard as she can go." Clara asked, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to ride out and see what all that dust is about." Thomas was already moving away. "You tell Cookie to get the bunkhouse ready for hurt men, and tell Peter to ride for the doctor in Bismarck. Now go." Clara did not hesitate. She had never asked Daisy for more than a gentle trot. But now she spurred the horse into a full gallop. The ranch buildings came into view, and men started coming out of the barn, drawn by the sound. She pulled Daisy to a rough stop in front of the cookhouse. Cookie was already there, his face grim. "Was it the payment run?" he asked. Clara fought to catch her breath. "Thomas said there are wounded. He said, get the bunkhouse ready. Peter needs to ride for the doctor." Cookie's voice cut through the noise. "Billy, go get Peter. Tell him to saddle the fastest horse and ride for Doc Harrison. You tell him it is the Red Willow Ranch and it is urgent." He looked back at Clara. "How many men are coming?" "I do not know," she said. "I could not see them clearly. But there was so much dust." Cookie was already barking out orders, and men ran to do what he said. Clara just stood there, feeling helpless, until Cookie took her by the arm. "Miss Clara, I need you to be strong. Can you do that for me?" Clara took a deep breath and centered herself. "Yes." "Good. Then come on and help me. If men are hurt, we will need clean rags, hot water, and whiskey to clean the wounds. Do you know anything about being a doctor?" "I know some basic field medicine from my teaching books," Clara said. "I have cleaned cuts and set a broken finger before." "Well, it will have to be good enough until Doc Harrison arrives." Cookie was already pulling her toward the cookhouse. "Let us just pray they all make it back alive." But prayer was not enough. Clara saw that 15 minutes later when the riders finally stormed into the ranch yard. There were only 5 horses instead of 7. Jack Morrison was in the lead, his face a mask of gray dust. 2 men she did not know were slumped over in their saddles. And then she saw Cole Bennett, barely conscious, held up by the man riding next to him. The whole left side of his shirt was soaked in dark, spreading blood. "Get him down from there," Jack yelled. "Be careful. He has been shot." Several men rushed to the horses. Clara watched as they eased Bennett from his saddle. His face went limp with pain, and his blood dripped onto the dry dirt of his own ranch. A cold, hard feeling took root inside her. It was not fear. It was something else. "Bring him to the bunkhouse," she heard herself say, her voice clear and strong. "Cookie, I need those supplies now. Jack, what happened?" Jack was helping to lower Bennett onto a makeshift stretcher. "We were ambushed by rustlers about 5 miles out. They knew we had the payment money. They knew exactly where we would be." His voice was rough with grief. "They killed Henry and Tom. Mr. Bennett was shot while he helped us get away." Clara took in the terrible news. 2 good men were dead. Bennett was shot bad. It was a planned attack, which meant they had a traitor. But all that would have to wait. Right now, a man's life was on the line. She followed the stretcher into the bunkhouse. Cookie had already turned it into a makeshift hospital. There were clean sheets on 2 of the beds and a table with cloths and bottles. "Put him right here," Clara said. "Gently now. Someone get that shirt off him so I can see the wound." The cowboys were surprisingly careful as they laid Bennett on the bunk and cut away his bloody shirt. Clara washed her hands and went to his side. The bullet had hit him high on the left shoulder. It was still bleeding but not pumping out. The bullet had gone all the way through. She could see the exit wound on his back, bigger and uglier than the one on the front. That was both good and bad. It was good because the bullet was not still in him. It was bad because now she had 2 wounds to fix. Bennett's eyes fluttered open. They were dark with pain. "Clara," he whispered. "I am here," she said, pressing a clean cloth to the wound. "You are going to be just fine, but I need you to be very still." "Henry and Tom," he mumbled. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "Jack told me. I'm so sorry, Cole. But right now, you need to focus on staying with me." "It hurts," he said, and the simple truth of it almost made her cry. "I know it does. I have to clean the wound and stitch it up. It is going to hurt even more before it gets better." She looked at Cookie. "I need the whiskey and something for him to bite down on." Cookie handed her the bottle and a thick leather strap. Clara then looked at the men crowded in the doorway. "Everyone out but Jack and Cookie. He does not need a crowd watching this." They left and she turned back to Bennett. His gray eyes were focused now, and he was looking at her with trust. "This is going to hurt a lot," she said again. "I am sorry." "Just do it," Bennett gritted out. Clara poured whiskey over the wound. Bennett's whole body went stiff, and he hissed through his clenched teeth. The wound bubbled and she worked fast, cleaning out the dirt. "The bullet went clean through," she said, mostly to herself. "It missed the bone and all the important arteries. He is a lucky man." I do not feel very lucky," Bennett said through the pain. "You are alive when you should be dead," Clara said plainly. "That is lucky. Now bite down on this." She gave him the leather strap. "I'm going to stitch the back wound first." She had never stitched up a person before, only practiced on pigskin back at college. But her hands were steady, and her stitches were neat and small, pulling the torn skin and muscle back together. Bennett did not make a sound, breathing through a leather strap clenched in his teeth. His hand gripped the bunk so hard his knuckles shone white. Clara worked with a quiet, steady focus while Cookie stood by with fresh water and cloths. Jack just watched from a corner, his face a road map of worry. The bullet had gone clean through, and the hole on the back took 15 stitches. Clara cleaned it up, bandaged it, and carefully rolled Bennett onto his side to see the front. That wound was smaller but went deeper. She had to work slow, making sure she closed it up right from the inside out. When she was done, her back was slick with sweat, but the wounds were clean and closed. Bennett's breathing had finally evened out. Clara stepped back from the bunk, wiping the blood from her hands. "He has to stay still for at least 3 days. If he does not move around, the stitches will hold." "I understand," Jack said in a low voice. "We will make sure he does not go anywhere." Clara looked at Cole Bennett, so pale under the blankets, and felt a change inside her. While she was stitching him up, with her hands trying to put him back together, that line she had kept between them, the one between a boss and his bookkeeper, had washed away in blood and whiskey. "I should check on the other men," she said, turning so no one could see the look on her face. The other 2 boys had scrapes and bruises, but nothing that needed stitching. Clara patched them up quick and stepped outside. The air felt thin after being in that tense room. The sun was going down. The whole mess had taken less than 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. Peter found her in the yard, just staring at her stained hands. "Doc Harrison is on his way, but it will be a while. He was out delivering a baby." Peter paused for a moment. "I heard what you did in there." "That was mighty brave, Miss Clara." "It was what needed to be done," she said. "That is not the same thing." "No, maybe not. But it was still brave." Peter gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze and went on about his evening chores. Clara walked over to the water pump and scrubbed her hands until they were raw. Then she went to her own cabin, shut the door, and finally let herself tremble. She had kept a man alive with a needle and thread. She had felt his life in her own 2 hands. And somewhere between that first stitch and the last, she finally understood what she had been trying to ignore. She cared about Cole Bennett. And it was not as a boss or even as a friend. It was something deeper and a whole lot more dangerous. Clara sat on her bed as the room grew dark and let that feeling sink in. She had come to Dakota for a fresh start, for work that mattered. She sure had not come looking for this powerful need to protect him, the sheer terror when she thought he might die. A knock came at the door. "Miss Clara," it was Cookie's voice. "Mr. Bennett is asking for you." Clara smoothed her dress and opened the door. "Is he worse?" "No, ma'am. He is just restless. Says he will not settle down until he knows you are all right." Cookie's eyes were kind. "Hard to believe, is it not? The man gets shot and stitched up, and he is worried about the woman who saved him." Clara followed Cookie back to the bunkhouse. The other men were asleep, but Bennett was awake, his eyes finding her the second she walked in. "You should not be sitting up," Clara said, hurrying to his side. "I could not rest easy until I knew you were okay." His voice was scratchy, but it was clear. "You saw things today a teacher should never have to see." "I am fine," Clara said. "You are the one who took a bullet. I have been shot before. It is part of the job out here." Bennett's hand found hers. His grip was weak, but it was purposeful. Clara, what you did back there, most folks would have run or fainted. You stayed. You saved my life. Any doctor could have done it. But there was not a doctor, was there? There was just you. His thumb brushed against her palm, and Clara felt a warmth creep into her face. Thank you does not feel like enough, but I mean it. Clara sat on the edge of his bunk, their hands still together. You are welcome, but you need to rest now. I cannot rest, Bennett said, his eyes serious in the lamplight. I have got to arrange burials for Henry and Tom. I need to find out who set us up. I have got to make this ranch safe. Jack is handling all that, Clara said, her voice firm. Your only job is to heal. That is it. The men need you alive and well, not working yourself to death before those stitches have a chance to set. You have built something good here, Cole. Do not be stubborn enough to throw it all away. He just looked at her for a long moment, and the way he did made her forget to breathe. You called me Cole. She had. It just slipped out, as natural as breathing. I am sorry if I was too forward. No. His hand tightened on hers. It felt right. They sat there in the quiet as the lamp flickered. Clara knew she ought to leave to give him space, but his hand was warm in hers. He was alive, and that was all that mattered right now. The ambush was planned, Cole said after a while. They knew where we would be, and they knew we had the payroll. So either someone on the inside talked or someone has been watching your routine, Clara suggested. How often do you make that run? First of every month. Same trail. Then it might not be a traitor, just someone who is observant. It was a dangerous thought, but different from having a snake in their own camp. Cole thought about that. Smart. I will tell Jack to consider that. You can tell him tomorrow. After you have had some rest, Clara said, standing up and gently pulling her hand away. I mean it, Cole. Sleep. Stay. The word was soft, but it held her in place. Just until I fall asleep. Please. Clara thought about her reputation, about what folks might say. Then she looked at his face, pale and tight with pain, and sat right back down. Just until you sleep, she agreed. She stayed for 2 hours, long after his breathing was deep and even. Leaving just felt wrong. The memory of his blood was too fresh. Something big had changed between them, and she needed a moment to understand it. When the moon was high, she carefully slipped her hand from his and stood up. She checked his bandages one last time before slipping out into the cool night. Jack was in the yard, keeping watch with a rifle across his lap. He asleep? He asked. Yes. Hopefully he will stay that way for a while. Clara sat on the bench next to him. What about the others? Henry and Tom. We buried them at sunset up on the hill next to Mr. Bennett's folks. I said a few words. Jack's voice was heavy with sadness. They were good men. Did not deserve to die over payroll money. No one deserves to die for money, Clara said softly. But they died protecting their friends. Protecting Cole. That has to mean something. It does. Jack was quiet for a bit. You did a good thing today, Miss Clara. Real good. I am not like most women. No, ma'am, you sure are not. Jack looked over at her, a hint of approval in his eyes. Mr. Bennett is a good man, the best I have ever known. He deserves a woman who can stand tall when the wind blows hard. Clara felt her cheeks get warm, and she was grateful for the darkness. I am just his bookkeeper, Jack. Nothing more. For now, maybe. Jack stood up, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. But I have got eyes, Miss Clara, and so does everyone else on this ranch. The way he looks at you, and the way you look right back at him, that is not business. That is something else entirely. He walked off into the night, leaving her alone with a truth she was not ready to face. She cared for Cole Bennett more than was smart and more than she ever planned to. And today, with his life in her hands, she knew that caring had turned into something that felt an awful lot like love. Love. Clara stood up and walked back to her small cabin. She had come out here to be independent, to do work that meant something. Falling in love with the man who paid her wages was never part of the plan. It made everything so much more complicated. But as she got ready for bed, she could not make herself feel sorry for it. The timing was terrible, but the feeling was real. Outside her window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch. The cattle were quiet, and the wind whispered through the grass. Cole was alive. The ranch would carry on. And Clara Winslow, the teacher and bookkeeper who had become a surgeon out of necessity, would have to figure out what to do. She would figure out how to love a man who believed in books and freedom for working folks. She would figure it out one step at a time, with honesty and hard work. The vast Dakota night settled around her cabin, dark and full of promise. And for the first time since she stitched up Cole's wound, Clara let herself smile. Dr. Harrison showed up around midnight. He was a tough-looking man in his 60s who smelled like tobacco. He checked Cole's wounds by the light of a lantern while Clara watched him like a hawk. "Those are some clean stitches," the doctor said, finally straightening up. "Whoever did this knew their business. Both wounds are closed upright. There's no sign of infection yet. You said it was Miss Winslow here?" "It was her," Jack confirmed from the doorway. Harrison looked at Clara with a new kind of respect. "Where did you learn to do surgery like that, miss?" "My teaching college required us to learn basic medical skills," Clara explained. "I never thought I would actually have to use them." "Well, you used them just fine. You saved this man's life, no doubt about it," Harrison said. He pulled a small bottle from his bag. "This is laudanum for the pain. Give him 2 drops in water every 4 hours for the next 2 days. Keep the wounds clean and dry. If you see any red streaks spreading out from the stitches, or if he gets a fever, you send for me right away." "I will," Clara promised, taking the bottle. Harrison packed up his bag. "He needs to stay put for at least a week. No riding, no heavy work, nothing that will pull on those stitches. He is a lucky man. 3 inches lower and that bullet would have hit his lung or his heart. If it had hit him square, it would have shattered his collarbone. This way it will heal clean." After the doctor left, Clara and Jack just stood there, looking at their wounded boss. With his eyes closed, Cole's face looked unguarded, and you could see the pain settle deep around his eyes and mouth. "You ought to get some rest," Jack said softly. "I will sit with him." "I can do it, Miss Clara," Jack insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "You have been running on pure grit for hours. Go on now. I will wake you if anything changes." Clara was so tired she could feel it in her bones. Her hands still trembled thinking about the fight. "You promise you will wake me?" He nodded. She finally left, barely remembering getting back to her cabin before sleep took her. A knock on her door woke her up in the gray light of dawn. It came again, more urgent this time. Clara opened the door to find Thomas, his face worried. "Mr. Bennett is asking for you, Miss Clara. He is being mighty difficult. He will not take his medicine or stay put. Jack thought you might could settle him down." Clara was already dressing. "Tell him I am coming. And Thomas, get some hot water for new bandages." 5 minutes later, she walked into the bunkhouse and found Cole sitting on the edge of his cot, his face pale with pain, but his jaw set like stone. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" Clara asked, her fear coming out as anger. "You were shot yesterday, Cole. You need to be resting." "This ranch does not run itself," he said through his teeth. "Cattle need moving. Fences need checking. And we have 40 good men who can handle all of it," Clara shot back. "What we do not have is a spare ranch owner if you pop your stitches from being stubborn." Cole's gray eyes met hers, and something in his gaze made her hold her breath. "Folks are counting on me." "Then you need to stay alive for them," she said, her voice softening. "Cole, please. You hired me to help run this place. Let me do my job. Let Jack and the men do theirs. Trust that what you built is strong enough to stand on its own for a few days." "It is about trust," Clara said, sitting beside him, careful-like. "You trained these men. You taught them to be capable. Now you have to trust them. Cole was quiet for a long time, a battle going on behind his eyes. The need to be in control was fighting with the hard truth of his injury. I do not know how to just be still, he admitted, and the honesty of it made her heart ache. I know, she said, but you are fixin' to learn because the only other choice is dying, and I will not have that. Clara picked up the medicine bottle. Now, you are going to take this. Then I will check your bandages, and you are going to sleep. When you wake up, I will bring you the account books to look over. That is the deal. That is not much of a deal. It is the only one you are getting. She measured 2 drops into a cup of water. Drink. He took the cup. You get mighty bossy when you are worried. I call it being authoritative. Clara watched him drink, then took the cup. All right, let me see those bandages. She worked gently, carefully unwrapping the cloth. The wounds looked clean, just angry and red around the neat black stitches. Cole did not move a muscle, but she could feel how tense he was. Still hurts pretty bad, she said, tying off the fresh bandage. Some? You mean a whole lot, do you not? Clara met his gaze. You do not have to be tough with me, Cole. There is no shame in hurting. There is shame in being weak when folks need you to be strong. Clara just looked at him, this man carrying so much weight he did not know how to set it down. Strength is not about ignoring what your body needs, she said quietly. Real strength is knowing when to rest, so you can come back stronger. My own father taught me that. That when I was wearing myself out in college. Clara, he said, a candle that burns at both ends makes a bright light, but it does not burn for long. Better to have a steady flame. Cole's face softened. Your father sounds like a wise man. He is, she smiled, thinking of him back in Philadelphia. I should write and tell him I am teaching cowboys now. He will think I have lost my mind. Have you? Probably, she admitted, gathering the used bandages. But I like it here. Now get some sleep. She was almost at the door when his voice stopped her. Clara. Yes, thank you for not letting me be a fool about this. The look on his face held more than just gratitude, and it made her heart skip a beat. You are welcome, she said softly. Now, rest. Outside, the ranch was already humming with the morning's work, though worried glances were still cast toward the bunkhouse. Jack found her near the pump, washing her hands for the third. Bloodstains were long gone, but the morning's trouble still hung in the air. Is he resting easy? Jack asked. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and replied, The medicine will hold him for a bit. She looked Jack square in the eye. I need you to teach me this ranch, Jack. Cole wants to see the books, but if he can't make the calls, I need to know what is happening out there. Jack gave a slow, steady nod. That makes good sense. Come on. I will give you the rundown. For the next 3 hours, Clara got a crash course in running a cattle operation. Jack laid it all out, from when the herds moved pastures to who we sold our beef to. He explained the tangled mess of water rights and property lines. She learned how to manage 40 men spread thin over thousands of acres and how to spot a sick cow from a healthy one. Clara took it all in, asking smart questions and scribbling in a little notebook. By lunchtime, she had a good enough handle on the Red Willow Ranch to help keep it running. You catch on quicker than a hiccup, Jack remarked as they headed back. Some folks take weeks to learn half of that. Clara just said, You learn fast, or you do not last long where I am from. She ate with the ranch hands, and the quiet was heavy. Losing Henry and Tom was a fresh hurt for everyone. But she could feel the men looking at her differently now. It was not doubt anymore, but a kind of respect. They all knew how she had held her nerve and stitched up the boss. She was not just the teacher from the city anymore. She had earned her place. After the meal, Clara took the account books to the bunkhouse. Cole was propped up on some pillows, looking like a caged animal. 3 hours, he grumbled the second she walked in. I have been stuck in this bed for 3 hours, and I am about to climb the walls. Good thing I brought you some work, she said, pulling up a chair. She opened the first ledger. Jack showed me how things run this morning. Now, you and I are going to go over the money. They spent that whole afternoon deep in the numbers. Clara drilled him on prices, contracts, and why cattle were worth more in one season than another. Cole answered everything with a teacher's patience, never once talking down to her. He was treating her just like she treated his men, with genuine respect. You're a natural at this, Cole finally said, watching her figure out profit margins. Not just the teaching, but the business. You see things I have overlooked. We just see different things, Clara answered, circling a strange number in the feed costs. You know the land and the cattle. I know numbers and how to keep them straight. I reckon together we see the whole picture. Cole repeated the word, together. Something in his voice made Clara look up. The usual guard was gone from his face. He looked tired and hurt, and he was letting her see it all. For a man who kept himself so locked down, it was a powerful show of trust. Clara, I have got something to say, he said, his voice low. And since the good Lord seems to have made me honest, I'm going to say it. Clara put her pen down, her heart suddenly beating a loud rhythm in her ears. Yesterday, when I was lying there thinking this might be it for me, I was not scared of dying. I was scared I would not get the chance to tell you. He paused, finding the right words. To tell you how much you have changed this place. You have changed these men. You have changed me. He held up a hand. Please, just let me finish. You came here looking for a job, and I hired you to teach my boys to read, but I got so much more. I got someone who sees the good in men that others write off, someone who treats a rough ranch hand like a gentleman, someone who saves a man's life and does not fall to pieces. I got someone I did not even know I was searching for. Tears started to well up in Clara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I only came here because 3 men in Bismarck told me I was not wanted. If any of them had said yes, I would have never found Red Willow. I never would have met you. A small smile touched Cole's lips. Sounds like the best no you ever got. The very best, Clara agreed, because it led me right here, to work that matters with people who matter, to you. A thick silence settled between them, full of all the things that had been growing for weeks, now brought into the light by yesterday's violence. I do not know what we are supposed to do now, Cole said at last. You work for me, and I will not take advantage of that. But I cannot pretend I do not feel more for you than a boss should. Clara thought about all the rules a woman was supposed to follow. Then she thought about sewing this man back together, the overwhelming relief when she knew he would live, and how her world shifted the moment he asked her what kind of work she did. I care for you too, she said, her voice clear and strong. More than I ever meant to. It is not convenient, and it is probably not smart, but it is the truth. Cole reached out and took her hand, their fingers fitting together like they were made to. So what do we do, he asked. We are honest, Clara said, and we are careful. We make sure this does not hurt the ranch or the work we are doing, and we just take it one day at a time. That is not much of a plan, he said. It is the only one I've got, she replied, squeezing his hand. Unless you have a better idea. No, ma'am. All my plans flew out the window somewhere between getting shot and deciding I needed to keep Clara Winslow on this ranch forever. Clara let out a genuine laugh. Forever is a mighty long time, Cole Bennett. Is it? He asked, his eyes serious even as he smiled. Does not feel long enough to me. They sat that way for a moment, just holding hands while something new and precious started to take root between them. Then Clara gently pulled her hand back and picked up the ledger. You need to rest, and I need to get through these numbers. We will figure out the rest later. Clara, he said, Yes? When I am back on my feet, would you ride with me? Up to that big hill where you can see 3 whole territories. I want to show you this ranch the way I see it. A real smile spread across Clara's face. I would like that very much. In the days that followed, a new rhythm took hold. Cole healed up slowly, hating every minute of being stuck inside, but he listened to Clara. She changed his bandages twice a day and brought him ranch business to keep his mind occupied. They talked for hours about cattle and contracts, carefully stepping around the big unspoken thing between them. The school lessons went on too. Peter started reading whole sentences from ranch mail. Carlos proudly read aloud the first letter he had ever written to his mother. Billy found out he was a natural teacher and started helping the younger hands with their numbers. Jack Morrison got a letter back from his sister in Houston, and his hands shook as he read it to the class. He learned about nieces and nephews he had never even met. "I can talk to her now," he said later, his voice thick with emotion. "With my own words." "That is everything, Jack," Clara told him. "That is why this matters. Even Cookie got in on it, starting a little library in the cookhouse for anyone who wanted to borrow a book. The ranch's finances had never been in better shape. Clara found mistakes in old contracts and saved the ranch a pile of money. She set up a new system for keeping records that was simple and clear. "You have saved us more in 2 months than we would pay you in a year," Cole told her one evening as he looked over her work. His stitches were out, and he was almost back to his old self. His shoulder was mostly healed by now, with just some pink scars left, and he was allowed to do light work. "Good," Clara said. "Then you can afford to buy more school books and build up the library." "Already ordered 'em," Cole said as he closed the ledger. "Clara, the men want to do something for you, to say thanks for the teaching and for—" He touched his scarred shoulder. "For everything. They don't need to do that. They want to," he said with a warm smile. "And I'm not about to tell them no. So you shouldn't either. Just be gracious and let folks show their appreciation." That something special turned out to be a party. They cleared out the cookhouse, brought in extra lanterns, and even got a fiddle player to come all the way from Bismarck. There was food, music, and a whole lot of laughter. Clara stood on the side, just watching. She saw the men she had taught, now celebrating learning like it was the greatest thing on earth. Thomas was showing off his arithmetic to anybody who would listen. Peter sat in a corner, slowly sounding out words in a primer. "Dance with me," a voice said from behind her. It was Cole. He was all cleaned up, and his eyes were bright with returning health. "You're supposed to be resting that shoulder," she protested. "One dance won't hurt. Besides, I've been wanting to do this since the day you got here." He offered her his hand. "Please." Clara allowed him to guide her onto the dance floor. They moved to the sound of the fiddle, his lead quiet and sure. "This is a wonderful party," Clara said, smiling at the celebrating men. "They are celebrating you," Cole corrected her gently. "You saw value in men who had been told they had none. You changed their lives." "We did it together," she replied. "You gave me the chance." "Partners, then," Cole said, his gaze intense. "In the work and in everything else." "If that is what you want," Clara answered softly. "It is what I have wanted for weeks," he admitted. "I just did not know how to say it without disrespecting our work." The music played on as their friends watched with knowing smiles. "Then say it now," Clara prompted. "Here, with everyone watching, tell me what you want." Cole paused. Then his voice dropped so only she could hear him. "I want you to stay, not just as a teacher, but as my partner in all of this. I want to ride out with you at sunrise and show you every blessed inch of this land. I want to argue with you about the books and the horses. I want to watch you teach these men and feel amazed every single day that you chose to be here, that you chose me." Clara felt her eyes well up, but she would not let a tear fall. "I did choose you, Cole Bennett. I chose you the day you asked me what I was looking for, and actually heard my answer. You saw education as a path to freedom, not just some fancy decoration. I have been choosing you every day since. I love you, Cole said, as simple and true as the man himself. I know this is all happening fast, but it is the honest truth. I love you. Just then the music stopped, and in the quiet that followed, Clara could hear her own heart beating. I love you too, she said, and a wave of pure joy washed over Cole's face. I fought it. I told myself it was just gratitude. But it is love, and I'm done pretending it is anything else. He pulled her in close and rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, Clara. When you are ready, marry me. Let us build something here that is bigger than either one of us alone. She let out a laugh that was filled with pure happiness and surprise. Yes, yes, I will marry you, you hard-headed, wonderful man. But we are going to do it the right way with a proper courtship. Cole smiled. Anything you want, he said, as long as it ends with you staying right here. The fiddle player started a new tune, and they danced on. Clara closed her eyes, feeling Cole's arms around her, and a future that felt as wide open as the Dakota sky. She had arrived here with just $8 to her name, holding a teaching certificate that nobody seemed to want. Now she had a home. The 3 rejections she faced in Bismarck had led her to this exact spot, and Clara Winslow could not imagine a better place to be. They were married when the first snow fell in December, just 3 months later. The ceremony was on the hill that overlooked Red Willow Ranch. Cookie, it turned out, had been ordained as a minister long ago, so he did the honors. All 40 ranch hands stood as witnesses. Cole spoke his vows first, his eyes locked on hers. I promise to honor your strength and support your dreams, he said. To build with you, learn with you, and stand by your side as an equal partner in everything. Clara's voice was steady. I promise to challenge you when you are being stubborn and care for you when you are hurt. I promise to see all of you, the man who believes that learning can set a person free. Jack handed them 2 simple gold bands Clara had picked out in Bismarck. It was the same town that had turned her away, and now it was the place where she bought her wedding ring. When Cookie announced they were married, Cole kissed her so tenderly that some of the men had to look down at their boots. The party that followed was pure Red Willow with Cookie's best cooking and plenty of dancing. Clara danced with Cole and then with Jack, who told her she was the best thing that ever happened to the ranch. Peter, his scarred hands holding hers gently, said, You made us better. You made us believe we were worth teaching, and that changes a man. Later, in the main house that was finally theirs, Cole carried her inside. Tradition, he said with a grin. Besides, I've been wanting to do that for months. Clara looked around at the home they were building. Her books were on one wall, and his ranch records were on another. Her grandmother's quilt was draped over the sofa right next to his father's old journal. 2 different lives, now woven into one. Are you happy? Cole asked her. Happier than I ever thought I could be, Clara said. I came out here to teach, but I found a home instead. Cole kissed her forehead. I thought I was just hiring a teacher, but I found a wife. You found a wife, a bookkeeper, and a teacher, she corrected with a smile. I am very efficient. The winter that came was a hard one, with bitter cold and deep snow. But inside, life at Red Willow was thriving. The lessons never stopped. Men gathered in the warm cookhouse, practicing their reading by the light of the lamps. Carlos wrote a letter to his mother every single week, and she wrote back in Spanish. He would read her letters to the class, and soon the men were learning a little Spanish right alongside their English. Jack Morrison was writing back and forth with his sister and his nieces, reconnecting with a family he had not seen in years. Cole was even teaching his nephews their sums through the mail. He would send them problems and get back letters filled with their careful figuring. The change in the men was something to see. Billy, the young hand who once figured he was too thick-headed to learn, now filled the bunkhouse with the sounds of Shakespeare. He read those grand old plays aloud, and the grown men listened, hanging on every word. Peter Chan became Clara's right-hand man in the classroom. His scarred hands, which seemed ruined for anything fine, now guided pencils with a gentle patience. He told the struggling students that they were not broken. They were just learning. Young Thomas even started writing his own poetry. He shared it with Clara one evening, his face red as a beet. She told him, "There is real feeling here. You just keep on writing." The book learning had changed the whole feel of Red Willow Ranch. The men carried themselves with a new kind of pride. They could read their own contracts and write their own letters home. That spring, 2 of them left to start their own spreads, and Cole counted it as a success, not a loss. The ranch's good name brought in 3 new hands, a mix of folks from all over, and Clara taught them just the same. Before long, families from neighboring ranches started sending their children to Clara in the afternoons. It was a sight to see her grown-up students patiently helping the little ones with their letters and numbers. Cole watched it all one evening and said, "You are building something bigger than you knew." Clara looked up from her lesson plans and said, "Then maybe we should make it official." She imagined a proper schoolhouse that could serve the entire territory. Cole, ever practical, knew they would need money, more than the ranch could give. So they set out to raise it. Clara took her vision to the territorial government, speaking to the very same officials who had once dismissed her. This time, they listened. Cole used his business ties to gather more support. By working together, they secured the funding they needed. The next spring, a real schoolhouse went up, solid and proud, with glass windows and room for 50 students. Clara hired 2 more teachers to help, creating a place of learning that would last for years to come. Willow Academy swung its doors open in September of 1885, just 2 short years after Clara had hit Dakota territory with only $8 to her name. Folks came from 50 miles in every direction for the opening. You had parents wanting a better future for their kids, and grown-ups hoping to learn themselves. Clara stood on the porch, watching them all come in. There were children in their Sunday best, clutching brand-new books, and ranch hands still covered in the day's dust. Women who'd never had a chance at schooling walked right alongside men who figured they were too old to learn. Cole came up beside her and took her hand. "Look what you built, darling," he said, his voice low. "You took a hard no and turned it into all this." "No, we built this," Clara said, giving his hand a squeeze. "You laid the groundwork. You believed in it enough to put your own money and sweat into it." "Partners," Cole said, just like he always did. "Partners," she agreed. And that little academy took off like a wildfire. In the first year, they had 75 students, from little ones aged 6 all the way up to folks aged 60. You could see the change all around as more people learned to read and write. Other ranches even started their own schools, trying to follow what Red Willow had done. Jack Morrison, who was now the official foreman, ran the place with that same steady hand he'd always had. He could read a contract clean through and write his own reports now. When his sister visited from Houston with her kids, Jack would sit and read them adventure stories every night. Peter Chen ended up marrying a good woman from Bismarck. She had 3 little ones who needed teaching, and Peter taught them himself, his scarred hands guiding theirs, just like Clara had once done for him. "I never figured I'd be a father," he told Clara on his wedding day. "Didn't think a woman would look twice at a man with busted hands." "That's love, Peter," Clara told him. "It sees past the surface to what really matters." Carlos went home to Texas for a bit and came back with the teacher he'd been writing to. They got married right there at Red Willow, and she made their little schooling program even better. Billy even got his first poem printed in a newspaper. It was about horses and wide-open skies, simple but beautiful. He carried that clipping around like it was gold. "I'm a published writer," he'd say, a look of pure wonder on his face. And young Thomas, he was the first from Red Willow to head off to college in Chicago. He studied books and came back every summer to help teach the others. "You gave me this chance," he told Clara before he left. "You and Mr. Bennett showed me I could be something more." Even Cookie wrote a cookbook full of his recipes and stories about ranch life. All the money he made went right back into the academy. The years rolled on, and Clara and Cole's own family grew to include 2 daughters and a son. Those kids learned to ride and read about the same time. They grew up speaking English and Spanish and understanding the ways of their Lakota neighbors. The ranch thrived, and Red Willow became a place known for fairness and learning. Cole handled the cattle and the land while Clara managed the books. They were true partners in every sense of the word. They bought more land, built more homes, and turned the academy into a place where folks could get ready for college or a good trade. 10 years after she first arrived, the territory gave Clara a special award for her teaching. The ceremony was held in the very same building in Bismarck where that man, Pritchard, had turned her down flat all those years ago. And wouldn't you know it, Pritchard was there. He came up to her afterward, looking older and a bit worn. "Mrs. Bennet, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice stiff. "I was wrong. I let my own foolish ideas get in the way of seeing your worth." Clara looked at the man who had nearly crushed her hopes. She didn't feel angry anymore. "Thank you for that, Mr. Pritchard," she said calmly. "But I can't say I regret it. If you hadn't closed that door, I never would have found my way to Red Willow. Sometimes a locked door is a blessing." As she walked out into the sunshine on Cole's arm, he asked, "Ever wonder what would have happened if they had said yes?" Clara thought for a moment. "I suppose I'd have taught school, children, and probably done some good, but I never would have met you. I wouldn't have this ranch or the school or this whole community we've built up. I wouldn't have learned that my own value isn't about who says yes to me, but what I do with the chances I get. So no regrets, not a single one." Clara rested her head on his shoulder as the planes rolled by. "I showed up here with $8 and a piece of paper that nobody wanted. Now I'm richer than I could ever count. Not in cash, though we do all right, but in the lives we've touched, and the partner who sees me as his equal. Our kids will grow up knowing that a good education is their right." When they got home, the setting sun was painting the sky gold and rose. The academy stood tall against the horizon, lights glowing in the windows. The kids came running out to greet them. Sarah was 8, Michael was 6, and little Emma was just 4, all of them talking at once about their day. Clara pulled them in for a big hug while Cole swung Emma up onto his shoulders. "Mama, did you get that award?" Sarah asked, her eyes shining. "I sure did, sweetie. But it really belongs to every single one of us." "It belongs to everyone at Red Willow," Michael said with a serious face. "Papa says we're building something that will last." "We sure are," Clara agreed. "Something that will be here long after we're gone." Later that night, with the kids tucked in bed, Clara and Cole sat on the porch watching the stars come out. It was a familiar comfort, a peaceful end to a day full of hard work and purpose. "Do you remember that first night you spent here?" Cole asked. "You were in that little guest cabin, probably scared half to death." "I was not terrified," Clara said with a laugh. "A little unsure, maybe. But I was hopeful. I'd finally found a place that needed what I could do. And now," she said, taking his hand, "now I'm home. This is home. Not just the land, but what we've made together. This ranch, our school, and our family." Cole kissed her forehead. 10 years ago, I just needed someone to teach my men to read their letters. It was the best decision I ever made." "Second best," Clara corrected him, smiling. "Clara. The best was when you asked me to be your wife." "Well, that's a fair point," Cole said, pulling her close. "You think we'll still be out here in another 10 years, arguing over which decision was the best one?" "I can guarantee it," Clara said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We'll be here in 20 years, and 30, Lord willing. This is what we built, Cole. It's more than a ranch or a school. It's a life where every day counts for something." They sat together in a comfortable quiet as more stars filled the big sky. That same Dakota sky had seen her arrive with nothing, and now it watched over the life she had created. Just 10 years earlier, Clara Winslow stood in the dust of Bismarck with 3 rejection letters and $8 in her pocket. She was terrified that coming out west was the biggest mistake of her life. Now, Clara Bennet sat on her own porch, surrounded by everything that grew from that failure. She had a marriage built on true partnership. She had children who knew that learning was power. And she had a school that had taught hundreds of folks how to read and write. Those rejections felt like the end of the world back then. Turns out they were just the beginning. The Red Willow Ranch was proof 1,000 times over that every person deserves a chance to write their own story. Clara closed her eyes, just listening to the sounds of the prairie at night. The lowing of cattle, the wind sighing through the grass, and Cole's steady breathing beside her. It was all so familiar. It was all home. She had come out here looking for a job and found her life's purpose. She came looking for her independence and found a true partner. She had hoped to make a small difference, and instead, she built something that would echo for generations. All those students would go on to teach others, and their children would grow up valuing knowledge. The Dakota Territory that once seemed so harsh and empty now felt like the only place she ever really belonged. It hadn't changed, but she had. She was no longer a woman looking for someone to approve of her. She was a woman who created her own worth, who understood that a closed door is often a gift. "Thank you," she whispered, to whoever or whatever had guided her journey. "Thank you for those 3 rejections that pushed me right to this spot. Thank you for the fear that made me brave enough to say yes to Cole's offer. And thank you for every single hard day that showed me how strong I really was." Cole gave her hand a squeeze. He understood without her needing to say a word. They sat there together, watching the stars. 2 people who found one another and built something that would outlast them. It wasn't just in the buildings or the books, but in every life they touched. The Red Willow Ranch and Academy was living proof that rejection can point you toward your true destiny. It showed that education is freedom, and that treating people right changes everything. Clara Winslow Bennett smiled into the night. She had come to the Dakota Territory to be a teacher. She ended up staying to build a legacy. In the morning, when the sun came up and the school bell rang, she would be right there, ready to keep going. One student, one lesson, one changed life at a time. The whole journey started with 3 rejections and only $8. It led her right here, to this porch, to this life, and to the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, purpose, and love. She had found everything she was ever looking for in the very last place she'd ever expected. And she wouldn't change a single step of the road that brought her here. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.